Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. We reach you live from the All-America city of Morrisville, North Carolina. In North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the Union. And here today on this show, we talk about global affairs, an increasingly divisive, turbulent world politically. And we talk about the economy, the recession. I'm sorry for the Wi-Fi slow connection. I'm lagging, but at least you can hear me. And we welcome you to the show. Today, my monologue is based on the greatest of all time. Sorry, my tie is crooked. Tom Brady. Yesterday, he announced he is retiring in an emotional video that he posted on Twitter. This does seem like it will be his retirement. In my lifetime, I've had the honor of watching the careers of the greatest tennis players that ever existed, from Pete Sampras to Andre Agassi, then eventually Roger Federer, and now Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic. But in football, for the past few decades, all of us have had the honor of watching Tom Brady. He has simply been an unbelievable athlete on the field and even off the field as the brand of the NFL. He won 6 Super Bowls with the New England Patriots and won with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, led his career in passing yards at 89,214 yards, was a 3-time league MVP, passed for 4,694 yards, the third most in the NFL, and 25 touchdowns this past season, his third with Tampa Bay. I personally believe that in the history of the NFL, there's never been a player, a quarterback, that has just been such a remarkable athlete. Yes, there was Deflategate and other negative things. And yes, he's divorcing. His ex-wife is Giselle. But I truly believe that there was no player on the field who would make a minute seem as long as Tom Brady. Now the question we have to ask ourselves is, will there ever be a quarterback or a player in the NFL like him? I think there are quarterbacks out there that might be able to do it, but the game is tough. It's hard to win Super Bowls. Even 1 or 2 is hard enough. But to win 6 or 7, that's really, really unbelievable. He brought life back to Boston. So we'll see what will happen now that he's left as a Buccaneer. So today we're going to devote a little time on the show before we get into some international and global affairs and national affairs to talk about Tom Brady, the GOAT, his legacy, and what we can learn from Brady in our business lives, in our political careers, because he really was somebody that went in every day, every minute, working and training to be a champion, having courage, heart, a great attitude, motivated, persistent, innovative, optimistic, and never giving up till the final day where he's finally retired, looking for Super Bowl 8, which never happened, but hopefully we can remember the 7 that he won. Let's get started. Tom, we wish you well. We know you're not going to be living in affordable housing with a $375 million contract with Fox News, and I'm sure you'll find other things to do. But for what it's worth, even though I'm a Steelers fan, I'm going to miss watching you throw a football. Let's get started. We have today with us Mark Lee.
Glad to be here. We've got other folks like Dan Worthington. I think Lee Newton Rhodes is
Morning.
with us. And who knows, the Boston Nick Palveda may be joining as well. So we're going to see if we can bring him into the picture and all in that line. Tom Brady was definitely a great player and an amazing player. There is no doubt about that. He will go down in history as one of those top ones, along with Bart Starr, one of my favorite ones, Fran Tarkenton, as I am a diehard Minnesota Vikings fan, and there have been other players on the Minnesota Vikings franchise that have done great as well. I will say that Tom did not always do great for you in fantasy football, because he was my fantasy football quarterback on a couple of years, and a couple of those times he did great in putting up some points and everything. But there were other times that Tom did not always have the game that you would want him to have when he is playing as your fantasy quarterback. And of course, you got to surround him with other good players as well. So that wasn't always the case. And there were some times that he might rack up 15 or 20 points for my fantasy team. There were other times that he got me like 2. So sometimes it wasn't always the greatest in the fantasy lanes and all in that space. But there is no doubt he was a great player, an amazing player. And like you said, he's going to go into the TV booth and he'll do a great job there as well. Who knows? Maybe we'll get him to pop up on Pod TV at some point. But there's that whole contract thing and all in that space. But me and Nick are stubborn. We might still try to get him.
Yep,
Yeah, and I just real quickly, we don't want to spend the whole. I got to leave in a few minutes, but I did want to talk to you about. I ran into Mark Lee yesterday, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the context of that meeting. But I mean, my take on it is that it's been a great run. I really wish he had gone out on top, having won the last Super Bowl. I think it would have been better, like when Sampras won the U.S. Open in 2002, and that was the last match he played against his arch rival Andre Agassi. Great way to go out. Always remember Pistol Pete with that final ace and raised up his hands in emotion. And of course, his records were beaten by Federer, and now, and Novak Djokovic has tied the all-time great record. But I do think that he was a remarkable asset for the NFL. And the fact that he was able to have a career so long, 20 years, and just so dedicated to excellence is fantastic on and off the field. So I'm glad he's going to be staying as a commentator. Hopefully, we'll see him. And I don't know who could. Maybe Mahomes, possibly.
Probably.
Yeah, but it's a harder league and it's very deep. And then you've got a lot of other talent like Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and others. So you never know. But I don't think any of them. Yeah.
Hey, Steve, I've got a question to ask you, though, because I know that you've gone into the political realm and definitely have been in there for a number of years. There have been a couple of other folks that had some great success that also then decided to stop into politics. So I was wondering, I know that definitely Charles Barkley has definitely had some thoughts around that, around political office. Definitely Jack Kemp was a major football player that had some time in the Congress and all in that space. As one that is in the political realm and as one that is seeing that he has still got a lot of popularity and all in that kind of realm, is there any thought that you have, either you or Nick or anybody else, that Tom Brady may decide to enter into another sporting game, that game of politics?
No way.
Well, I mean, I'll take a stab at that, and I want to go through some issues of the day. But I think that I don't know whether I don't believe Tom Brady. As a former athlete myself, not at that level, but as a college athlete, I can tell you the one thing about politics that is something that I don't enjoy, that I think is very hard for athletes, is the lack of control. When you're on a football field, or for me, my sport was tennis, I could always control the point. I could always dictate play. I was a baseliner. I was fast. I won a couple of state championships, was nationally ranked. I think you don't have that control in politics because you're just so succumb, especially now with the social media, the tweets, the fundraising. I don't know whether Tom Brady would ever be willing to do something like that. But of course he's a celebrity. Could he run for governor of Massachusetts? Probably,
Yeah.
So.
Steve, when you make that sports analogy, you're making it from tennis, which is a one-person sport, basically, where you have control over yourself, as opposed to football, where there's lots of team players on your side that you don't have control over how they're going to react.
Okay, I can shorten this conversation. It's a horrible idea.
He could be a governor.
Okay, it's absolutely a horrible idea. Okay, yeah. This whole notion that some guy who can throw a football understands geopolitical movements is stupid. Because the thing is, he spent all his time throwing footballs, not his time studying what's going on in Russia,
Pakistan,
and the rest of the world.
And he took a number of hits to the head too. I mean, you got to realize
it hits the head. Okay,
yeah.
Nick,
the only reason people
Jim
they
McMahon,
have
right?
a chance to get elected is
Nick, are you sure he's going from football to spitballs? I think it's a logical move.
Yeah, well, it's only because we have such a horrible group of people in Congress right now that almost anybody can run, as we can
That
see.
is true.
But if
You
you
know,
look
I
at
understand there's
But
just
isn't
the
but hold on a second, Nick. Isn't one of the
merit
things
of it,
that folks
just because
want
somebody's
in
a
politics?
celebrity, it's
Wasn't
like,
one of the things
hey,
that we
Mark,
said
you
we
might as
want
well
in
have chess
politics?
grandmasters running.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
They're
Isn't one of
great
the
Hold on
things
a
we
second.
said we want in
Wait,
politics
I said,
is
I-
leadership? And one of the qualities of
No,
a good
there's no
quarterback.
No, they
is
don't want that,
leadership.
Mark.
Throwing a football doesn't mean you're a bloody leader. Give me a bloody break. The only reason he would even have a chance getting elected, I bet he doesn't know where half the countries in the world are. He alone is going to lead the United States of
and
America.
there's Deflategate, right?
sure.
Deflategate. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
He'd probably fail a basic geography test, and
Yeah.
and it's nothing bad. It's just he spent all his time focused on football.
It's like Bill Belichick running for president, right? It's the same bad idea.
It's a bad idea.
Same
Yeah,
bad idea. No. Commentary. Who would want to actually be in politics making as little as you do, at least
It's true.
except
And
on the
being
side. Except
sexually
on the
abused.
side. They make
Right.
a lot of money on the side, and with the
Dan on the side and under the table.
under the table, over the table, and in the freezer. We've seen
Guys,
that.
I'm going to go.
Freezer.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to go through the menu today, and then I'm going to end with some final thoughts.
The
And I'll be
menu?
back on- yeah, well,
I didn't
a couple of things. The Justice Department. Well, we're going to come back and talk about Tom Brady next week. Justice Department searched President Biden's beach house yesterday for more classified documents. There was an emotional funeral for Tyre Nichols yesterday. There's a deadly ice storm coming in Texas, and videos show evidence of a violent crackdown on protests in Iran. And the College Board has changed its new AP African American Studies course on Black history. I will end my remarks today with I ran into Mark Lee yesterday at the Hayti Center in Durham, and it was actually honoring Floyd McKissick Sr., whose son we've had on our show in Roku, and hopefully we'll have him back this month. And Floyd Jr. was a state senator. We've all talked to him, but his father was a major pioneer in civil rights. And it talked about Soul City and the Center for Racial Equality Core and his work on the March to Freedom, the March on Washington, but also the one in North Carolina, Meredith College. But what was stunning to me, and as I was at Hayti with Mark Lee, who I ran into there, is that the economic power of Hayti, which I've forgotten myself, just in terms of how this area in Durham was a metropolis of businesses, from doctors and lawyers to merchants to entrepreneurs, bankers, and there was so much wealth being created, and how all of a sudden, when in the 1960s, this was in the late 1800s, and then in the 1960s, the highways came in and went through all of that and really disenfranchised that community. But I think it made me realize how important economic mobility and economic power is. And, and it just was a really moving experience. But Mark, I want to thank you for being there with me. And I think we would like to have someone from Hayti come and speak to us about just a little bit, sharing with us a little bit the history of it, Mark. So whatever we can do to do that would be great.
Yeah, we can definitely arrange that. There's folks that are there as well as other parts of Durham that are near that area. They can definitely speak to the history. I can speak to the history as well. And it was definitely a very rich history. And we can get to that on another news show. And of course, I've touched base on that on some of the other shows like the Online Dinner Party and all of that. But definitely it is a part of what used to be called the Black Wall Street. Durham was not the only one. There was one in Tulsa. There was one in South Carolina. There was one down in Florida. There were a number of these communities that were built up after Reconstruction and that were definitely havens of Black economic development. And definitely there was a lot of growth in those areas. Unfortunately, money comes calling. We've talked about that in the past. And sometimes the money came calling to folks that decided that the money was more important than the whole notion of developing the community. Because sometimes there's the notion of selling out, and there were folks within the community that sold out to the community. And of course, there were outside forces as well that liked the idea of destroying those communities. And it wasn't just Durham, which was destroyed, as you just alluded to, by the highway, but there were places like Tulsa that were literally bombed and all in that kind of space. And I think Wilmington had a fire. Yes, exactly.
Wilmington, North Carolina, of all places, so I did notice we have Sasha Starr here, and maybe we can get an update on the Ukraine war. I do notice that we tend to ignore nuclear holocaust on all of our major networks or what's going on around the world. But I think it's kind of important what's going on around the world, especially in Ukraine. So maybe Sasha can give us an update on that.
Yeah, please. And I'm going to leave in a few minutes. I want to hear
Do you
Sasha.
remember,
Thank you, guys.
at the
Take care, Steve.
All right, we'll see you, Steve.
Bye-bye, Steve. Do you remember that at the beginning of Second World War, there was something what was called later a strange war? It was a war conducted by France primarily, and at the beginning England against Germany on the pretext that the Poland was attacked and occupied, and there was a treaty between Poland and France and England and so on. So it was a strange war. Nobody really attacked anybody, but it was a war. So there is a strange war now in Ukraine. So the West is changing its position on helping Ukraine several times a week, sometimes a day. At one point, they want Ukraine to be victorious. They don't want Russia to win this war, so they're helping Ukraine by promising and or sending certain ammunition and certain weapons and so on. On the other hand, a couple of days ago, Biden was asked if Ukraine deserves and will get the F-16 fighters. Biden said absolutely no. Now, it doesn't make sense to send Leopard tanks and other attacking for the weapons without support from the sky. If you attack, but you don't control the sky, so all your Leopards and everything else will be killed by Russian aviation. So it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. It doesn't make any sense. So that tells me that the position of the West is very similar to a strange war in the Second World War in terms that they really don't, obviously they don't want Russia to win. Okay, because then it means that West is agree with Russia position that whoever is bigger, stronger, and so on can rule the other nations, attack them, destroy them at will, and so on. I don't think that it's in anybody's interest, but that's what's happening in Ukraine. Ukraine is forbidden, even by receiving certain weapons, to attack Russian targets. So the Russian bombers flying from the Russian airport can go in Ukrainian sky, destroy Ukrainian cities and villages and killing people without Ukraine being able to attack that particular airport from which this...
I'm sorry, Sasha, why aren't they able to attack it? Whose rules are they playing by?
By West, who is supplying the weapons. There's always...
Russia's not playing by them.
No, I'm talking about Ukraine.
I understand that.
Well, but Sasha, all you have to do is Google the airport and send over a missile and bomb the hell out of it.
Ukraine is not allowed to have the missiles and weapons supplied by the West and US in particular to use against Russian-based targets. That's an agreement.
Do we want Ukraine to win or not?
Sorry?
Do we want Ukraine to win or not? Why are we there?
Well, I don't know. This is why I'm asking. This is why I'm talking about strange war. So
extremely, yeah.
So the West allows Russia at will to kill Ukrainians and destroy Ukrainian cities and villages and kill people and rape women and do whatever they want without Ukraine being able to retaliate, because the West say, okay, here's the weapons, but you cannot use them against Russia-based targets. Well, you can use them against Russian targets which are in Ukraine, so you can use them against occupying forces which are already located in Ukraine, but you cannot use them against Russian targets which are in Russian territory. That's quite ambiguous as well, because if you will take Crimea, which Ukraine is planning to liberate, it's de facto, as Russians are saying, it's a prime Russian territory, same as Moscow. Now, so what you do with Crimea, you attack it because it's all world recognizes it's Ukrainian territory, which was annexed by Russia unlawfully in 2014. But can you attack with Western weapons the Crimea or not? We don't know that. So the only what Ukrainians did a couple of weeks ago or so, they attacked Russian airports with Ukrainian made weapons and were very successful at it, by the way. They destroyed 3 heavy Russian bombers and could do much more damage, by the way. But it was basically heavy drones that I don't know how they could penetrate almost all Russia, because the city of Engels and Ryazan, they're located not too far from Moscow. So,
Tasha? Yeah. Tasha, does the United States or anyone else gain anything by this war dragging on? Are there things going on behind the scenes that we don't know?
Yeah.
That maybe you're aware of?
See, as in all wars, U.S. will gain the most. And whether it's a long war or short war, it doesn't matter. Why? Because there is a huge demonstration of superior US-made weapons. There is a lineup of 10 years of countries around the world who want to buy HIMARS, who want to buy F-16s, and all other weaponry produced by few companies. You're talking about General Dynamics, Norman Grumman, and you're talking about Raytheon Technologies. All those companies will thrive.
No, there's definitely people that are making money.
Mark and Sasha, this is about money then. It's not about lives.
No, it's about money, but you know, the military industrial complex is usually about money.
Anyway.
No, I understand.
No German lives, no lives except Ukrainians. Well,
Ukrainian lives, right.
So for West and US in particular, it's the best possible scenario. They can inflict enormous damage to Russia, its arch enemy, without losing one single soldier and just using Ukrainian brave armed forces and supplying them from time to time weapons. That's all.
Hey, Sasha,
money at the same time.
Here on the panel and everything. There were 2 other military things that are going on, because it's not just the U.S. that does this whole military industrial complex thing, but apparently, and I wish Chris was here because I know Chris is not the biggest fan of the French, but apparently the French seized a whole lot of Iranian assault weapons and missiles that apparently were heading to another part of the world that is in conflict. They were going to head to Yemen. So apparently the French forces and the U.S. forces seized a whole lot of weapons that were heading that way, including assault rifles, ammo, anti-tank missiles, and a bunch of other things that apparently the Iranians had and were getting ready to supply to Yemen in that particular war. And I know that another part of the world that we oftentimes talk about, even in the Ukrainian conflict, is the lovely area of India. And apparently India is worried about China. So they have raised, we talk about the politics of India, they have raised their defense budget to $72.6 billion amid the tensions with China. So they don't want to they're trying to play neutral in the Ukrainian war, but they want to jump in and raise their own money. So like I said, this whole money thing and that notion is throughout politics and throughout the world, because they are going to do that as they try to also raise spending on job creation before they have an election coming up. So it's interesting how all this happens around election time. But I didn't know if anybody had any thoughts around those 2 things and another part of the world, just to get into some of the military things that are going on. The Iran is blaming Israel, speaking of Iran, for the Isfahan drone attack, and they are warning of revenge. So that little old country over there might be causing some troubles as well. And Israel carried out an airstrike on the Gaza Strip, and that was actually earlier today. So like I said, this military conflicts around the world are definitely heating up around the world, and at the same time we've got the British workers over there in the largest strike in a generation. So definitely any thoughts about some of the other things going on in the world, including some of these military conflicts, because while what Russia is doing to Ukraine is definitely despicable and deplorable, and all those other words that begin with D that I probably could use and everything, and some other words that don't begin with D. There are other parts of the world that are facing some serious things in the world as well, including the little old country of Myanmar, where there is an anti-coup forces that are retaining optimism in, guess what? The face of air attacks. So there are these air attacks and wars going all over the world and everything. But anybody got any thoughts about some of those other conflicts that are taking place?
Mark, are you trying to use Ukrainian-Russian war to bring attention to some other conflicts or so on? If yes, okay, I appreciate that. But I want to tell you something, that a large war like Ukrainian-Russia, which is the largest military action by far since Second World War, and it's right in Europe, it deserves a separate attention from all other conflicts, number one. Number two, all other conflicts could be, in fact, connected to this war too, because there is a spillover from the conflict like this around the world possible, and actually that's what's happened in Second World and even First one too. But say in particular Second World War, it was a world war because many countries, even in Latin America like Brazil, Argentina, but all European countries except Switzerland, all Asian countries by far, they were all involved in Second World War. So this fight between Russia and Ukraine right now, it's contained to Ukraine, okay? There are some other conflicts, whether it's Israeli, Iran, and Africa's conflicts or so on, but there is nothing really to compare it with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. It's the same thing.
I wasn't comparing them, and I'm saying that they are definitely related. You know, the whole world in the geopolitical thing that we've talked about before is oftentimes interrelated. But I would be concerned about and I'm not saying that they're going to have this, but there are tensions apparently with China. China is a major place with 1 billion people and everything. India's got a lot of people as well. If that was to launch into a war, that would be even bigger than the Ukrainian war.
It's a very important theme, and I'm not trying to tell you not to talk about it. It just, in fact, I just don't understand what is the connection between Russian-Ukrainian war and something what's happened India, China, Africa,
or Myanmar. I mean, there's skirmishes.
You just said the connection. It's actually, we just said how much the military is tied into all of that, including the U.S. military, and how the U.S. is not launching into some of the wars the way that they should. You just said nobody's were sacrifice of American soldiers and all in that space, and the U.S. does manipulate a lot around the world. So you just actually answered your own question.
No, I don't.
Well, yeah, but you know, Mark, that's kind of unfair. All the countries are manipulating around the world. The Chinese are manipulating. The Russians are manipulating. It's just part of spycraft. It's a part of what they do, right? They foment dissension and all this. The geopolitical aspects of the Ukrainian war are very important, right? The reason Russia attacked Ukraine at this time is because you have an idiot as president of the United States who they didn't expect to be at all aggressive in countering this. And he was very slow to react, right? Now,
he still hasn't reacted appropriately.
There were they had CIA folks in Ukraine training the troops and everyone in preparation for something like this. But it's not as clear cut as you try to make it seem, Sasha. I know that you have a lot of patriotism and nationalism toward Ukraine, but the problem is there are a lot of Russian-speaking Soviet or former Soviet Russian-loving people that are in Ukraine, and do they have the right to self-determination as well, or do they have to be subject to the politics of Zelensky? I don't know. I don't know enough about that. But the problem is that it's a complex situation, and you're right. The conflict. Okay, the U.S. If the U.S. enters into strongly, it'll create a world war, and we want to avoid a world war because there's no winners in a world war, because that would mean, because Russia gets backed into the corner, they have no choice but to use their thermonuclear force as a last stab. That'll destroy the world. It will burn It will burn everything. It
I
will murder billions of
I think
people.
I've already mentioned on previous programs that Russian the military authorities, and there are some magazines that I read, they are challenging the MED theory, mutual assured.
I know, and that's because
They
they've dug
challenge
in.
It's very worrisome, of course.
They've dug in and created places for their population to go.
Yeah.
Where the United States, we have our bunkers underground, we know that, but it's only for the elite. It's not for everyone else, because the piss poor politicians in the United States don't care about everyone else. They only care about their asses and their friends, right?
They go underground. We burn.
Yeah, exactly. That's
But is there
really
any
true.
possibility, and I don't know the answer to this, but Sasha, is there any possibility, because there are areas of the world that have been in conflict for decades? As a matter of fact, I saw that recently the Palestinians were saying when folks were visiting the Israel from the U.S. that it was all empty promises, and we know that whole war, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, has been going on for decades, and all in that space. We can say the same thing about Ireland and the English conflict.
Yeah,
and all that. So is there any danger that this could become one of those type of wars that
IRA were
last
nothing
for
but
indefinitely?
I know you
Yeah,
like to support those kind of people, Mark, but because you call them freedom fighters, they're not. They're not freedom fighters. They're terrorists, right?
Well, it depends
People
on
who are-
one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. It depends on which parts of the organization we're talking about. There are Palestinians that are
Anybody in
not
the
members
United
of the
States
PLO. There are members of different organizations that are within Palestine.
anyone that tries to fight like for example, the IRA in Northern Ireland, they were terrorists, right?
Mhm.
The Hamas, they're a terrorist
I
organization.
mean, was the ANC terrorist? But they won the South
there's
African War.
And the Russians are terrorists. Let's just put this down where everybody understands. Russian government is a terrorist organization.
Well, right now they are, yes.
Right now they are, because you just don't
no doubt.
throw missiles into apartment buildings unless you're a terrorist organization.
Well, the
Okay?
Wagner Group is clearly a terrorist
And the
organization.
Wagner Group in Russia is a terrorist organization.
They should
And the
be
United
open.
Media
They should be
ignores
open.
this
They should
completely.
be open game to our people around the world. We should be assassinating them all over the world, the Wagner Group, because they are active all over the world, just like our spies are active all over the world.
But Dan and everybody, I do have a question to ask everybody. It's actually based on another part of the world and another story.
And part of it is that if they studied history in World War I and World War II, do you know the United States ignored German aggression? And part of the reason we entered World War I, World War II, our media was talking about, oh, we're going to out and swing and dance and all the other stuff. And they ignored.
Hey, Nick. Speaking of which, I got a question to ask you. Speaking of which, because I was going to get to a lighter story, but still, we can deal with the Harvard story as well. But there is a part of the world that is actually got some young people that were arrested recently for literally dancing in the streets, and that was Iran and everything, because they were literally dancing in the street, and they're going to be serving 10 years. So we need to enforce these rules in other countries that are totalitarian.
Mark, who cares? See, here's the problem. The U.S. media talks about people arresting the streets. Today, they talked about the Grammys. It was on CBS. I was going, the Grammys? Are you kidding? The war in Ukraine, it should be the #1 front story on all of our media. Instead, they don't want to talk about it. They want to talk about whatever makes you feel good or what the hot topic is. Let me tell you something. A hot topic is a thermonuclear bomb in your butt. That's a hot topic, okay? And Russia, whether we like it or not here in the United States, does have the capacity. If you don't believe me, go to YouTube and look at the Tsar Bomba. Okay, the Tsar Bomba is a very impressive atomic bomb that Russia has.
And it's already 60 years old,
I know it's 60 years old, and they probably can't deliver it. They'll probably drop it on Moscow, Sasha, because they're so incompetent.
Well, when they exploded, if you remember, it was carried under the huge airplane. It could not get inside of the airplane. It was carried under the airplane, and then it was get down on parachute, and then it exploded, and the wave went around the world 3 times.
Yeah, that's right. Go look at YouTube, atomic bombs, Tsar, T-S-A-R, Bomba. Okay, you're going to see they actually exploded it as a test. It wasn't underground. They
Hold on.
exploded on the ground in the
Nick,
60s.
you remember it was a 50 megaton bomb, but
Yes.
the plan was for 100 megaton bomb, and then they scrapped it and scaled it down to 50 because they were afraid that 100 will explode all Earth.
Right,
they
right,
decided,
yeah.
let's do 50.
It's great
Okay,
to
so-
chain reaction.
Whether we
So,
like it
Nick
or
and
not,
Sasha,
we're
let
in
me
the
just
West.
see if I've got
They
an
have
idea
some
that y'all would
impressive
like to try
toys.
again.
Who gives a
And
rat's
maybe this
rear
is
of a
going to work,
bunch of
maybe it's
kids
not going to work.
dancing in the
But you
street
made the comment about
in,
the Grammys, and a lot of people
United
have dealt with
States?
entertainment
Cares?
forever, even doing
Cares
wars,
about
even
the
doing World War War and World War II. The entertainment industry was still around. They were still
World War
doing stuff.
III will be
But
a
one of
lot
the things
more
that
entertaining.
happened, Nick, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as whether
don't
this
care
is what
about
we
the
would maybe
Grammys.
this is what we should do. Is there was this notion of doing the movies, and I wasn't around then because I was born in '62. But my understanding is that in the 40s and the 20s and even some of those other eras, they would still be showing movies, but at the beginning of the movie would be coverage of the war. So there might be some news reel that would take place before you watched whatever movie you're watching, whether you're
That's
watching
right.
like
That's what
That's
Wizard
when
of
the war
Oz
took
or something
place.
like that. So are we suggesting that the movie
Mark, that
theaters
would
go
have been
back to
the war
doing
took
that
place
and
prior
showing
to
like a
it
news
being
clip before they bring the movie?
Prior,
I
that's when the
remember
war was-
my time in
taking place.
when I was still young in Soviet Union. There were exactly the same things. They would before the actual movie started, they would show the sometimes it's called Life Around the World and so on.
Right.
And it was very interesting. It was like a documentaries of what's happening around the world. England, there is a fire, people are dying, and so on. United States, it's the fire in your California and elsewhere, and so on. Soviet Union, they built a huge plant which is going to employ so many workers and so much production will go. So there was always positive news from USSR and Warsaw Pact countries, and horrible, terrible news about the West, the United States, England, and so on. I'm familiar with all that, and I know how it works. Now, I want to tell you something, Mark. You mentioned something about the Palestine and Israel relationship. I want to tell you something interesting. It's about 3.5 years ago, I was in Israel, and I met and I spoke to Arabs who live in Israel. They work, and they're doing very well. And in fact, they are so upset about the Hamas and about all the terrorists and so on, because they're saying it affects us because as Arabs. So it puts a shade of who we are, what we are, and so on. So they are so much against this terrorist, even more than the West and Israelis themselves. So why is they continuing to doing these attacks? The money. They're getting money from all the Saudi Arabia and from Arab countries or so on, and they must do something to justify getting this money. That's why they are doing all this terrorist attack.
Yeah, they pay the families of these suicide bombers
Absolutely.
to go in and create havoc. It's just pure, unadulterated terror, promising.
Dan, it's called pay for slay.
Yeah,
It's called pay for play, but I'm gonna raise a little bit of a question here. But is it just the Palestinians that are doing that? Because as Viles have studied world history and stuff as well, there is some things going on in the U.S. system as well, where there are a lot of folks that are either encouraging or practicing terrorism on other countries, and sometimes it is coming from the U.S. You know, there are some people that are not 100% convinced that the U.S.'s hands were 100% clean, even in the 9/11 attack back in 2001. And I'm not saying
Mark,
whether that is the
quick
case or it
question.
isn't the case.
Oh,
Quick
you're
question.
so full of it.
You're talking about Louis.
Have we finished Palestine-Israeli question, and now we are talking America, or there is any connection in your opinion between two?
No, I think that there is a connection to what Dan calls dark money, because I think that there's some dark money that is all throughout the world and things in that space, and that is the problem with a lot of what goes on. And I think that it is very much not just in the Israeli conflict, but in the U.S. as well. I think it dictates a lot of what goes on in our military system. I think it dictates why a lot of the money is being exorbitantly spent by the militaries of the world and all in that space. And I don't think it's just a U.S. problem. I just said how much they were raising in India. That's a significant portion for a country that has a lot of affluent people and also has a lot of poor people.
What is the connection
India is
between Palestine and
but
Israel
not even close.
issue and what you just described. Where is the connection? What is the connection?
I'm sorry, what was the question again, Sasha?
What is the connection? We were discussing Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
No,
Then
you giving
jump
me an example
to
that you met somebody
United
from Palestine. I
States.
was bringing up another point that I was bringing and everything. But if you want to talk about folks that are from Palestine, I have some friends from Palestine as well. That some of them are involved in that conflict from one side. Some of them are Palestinian business people. So yes, I hear your point that there are some Palestinian business people, but that's the same thing that you
Not
can say about
some,
South Africa
not
and a number of
some,
other things. That there are
all
folks that are
Arabs.
for
All
a
Arabs, in
situation
my
or against the
opinion,
situation.
majority of Arabs who live in Israel and working there, and they have all rights as Israeli have, and the medical service and everything else. They are doing very well in Israel. And the Arabs in Palestine, instead of building their own country in their own society, they are absolutely dominated by terrorist groups who are getting money, and to justify this money they're doing all these atrocities and all these horrible acts in Israel, and therefore they're hurting their own people in Palestine, and they're hurting Arabs in Israeli proper. That's exactly it is. And what you're discussing about
I
US,
mean,
and
that's your
yes,
opinion, Sasha. I
there's
don't know that I
nothing to
necessarily
do.
agree with it. I actually am a
Oh,
supporter
geez.
of
Mark,
a
you're
separate
not
state for Palestine. I was
you're
also a
not
supporter of
you're
South
not a
Africa's
radical or
independence.
a supporter of terrorism around the world, are you?
No,
Do
I'm
you
not a
support
supporter of terrorism
terrorism
around the
around the
world, but I
world?
also know
It
that there's a
certainly
difference
sounds
between
like
a
it, and
terrorism and a freedom fighter.
it's not.
And
Oh
there are
God,
some
you're
folks
so
that,
full of
like
crap.
I said, there's a whole notion. Some people would consider Malcolm X a terrorist. I don't consider him a
And
terrorist. I
Mark,
consider
and
him a
Mark,
freedom fighter here in the U.S. Same with the
Mark
Black
is
Panther.
blowing up buses. Mark is blowing up civilian buses and pizza shops. Would you condone that behavior?
I would not condone that in the least bit, but I've also seen some
There are
countries
those
that
in
do
Hamas too.
support, that do some
Yeah,
similar stuff
I wouldn't
and
condone
everything in
that.
that nature. And I don't condone that either, because there are
That's
people
very
that are
poor,
on our supposed ally
notion.
side that we overlook and we just turn our eyes when they do it.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, blowing up buses for third parties that have nothing to do with it, it's just a terrorist act. I'm
No, I agree
sorry.
with that.
You know,
But I'm saying that there are terrorist acts that take place by some of those state agencies that we also support as well. That's all I'm saying.
you know, well, we're not supposed to support that type of operation, Mark.
Are you talking about like killings
We
like journalists like
supported
Khashoggi?
Venezuela. We supported some other countries that have done some horrible things, including the Philippines. So we can't say that we don't support those activities.
Supporting a country and supporting the direct actors is two different things. You know, because just because we support a country doesn't mean we support the actors that are engaged in this type of behavior. You know, so it's a whole different ballgame. But we can't equate what's going on in Ukraine because they do have Tsar-Bomba. You have to imagine. Could you imagine if you took the biggest bombs in the world and you gave them to the biggest terrorist organization in the world? What
You like
your world
Iran?
really looks like?
Nick, like Iran?
Anybody on this panel wants to
Russia.
take
No, but at the same time, what does it take to make a nuclear bomb?
The biggest bombs in the world.
Nick, what does it take to make a nuclear bomb? It takes radioactive material, right? And we got an ally that can't even keep track of their radioactive material because they're trying to figure out how they lost one in Australia. I wish Kill was here to tell us that, but they managed to lose an entire radioactive calcium.
Losing has nothing to do with a big arsenal in front of a group of people that are terrorists. In other words, and what you have right now is Russia, who's shown they're a terrorist. In other words, it's not like, hey, we're not pretending. They've shown they have no problem bombing civilians that have nothing to do with the war. That's a terrorist
I said several times on this show, I
And
have
the
no
reason-
problem, and I've mentioned several times that the Russian army is talking about
Anything
taking
that
him
happens
out.
here,
And there are other people that are talking about
terrorist
taking him out. I don't know why we haven't taken him out, because I mean, we took out the leaders of the Middle East and everything. So since we've all agreed that Russia is a terrorist and Putin is a terrorist, why haven't we taken him out? That's my question. Because like I said, we've taken out other folks who we deemed
as they
terrorists.
say in chess, my friend, not that easy. You know,
Not
it's not
that
like you just walk in and say, "Hey, Stalin, I mean, excuse me, Putin, can you just leave?" Or we're the United States, we're just going to take you out. Remember, this country, even though it's not a world power, does have world class bombs. Go look at Tsar-Bomba. Go look at the atomic bombs. They're all on YouTube. They're very impressive. Okay, and you know what? This group has no problem bombing civilians. In the United States, what we're doing, we're ignoring it. We're playing footsies with it. Today on the news, the Ukraine war should be number one. You know what they put up? The Grammys. Who gives a rat's rear about the Grammys? When there's a big hot bomb right behind you with a group of terrorists,
You said,
care about that.
Nick, you say
Not
that there should be
about the
number,
Grammys.
but
I'm
you
sorry,
should say
the Grammys
it should
are
be the
about
number one issue in the world. I can tell you
So,
that talking around
Russia deserves
people
to
here
be-
in Durham and other places, a lot of people are concerned about whether they can got enough food in their refrigerator or whether they got anything to eat and everything. So the economy is what is concerning a lot of people. and
Economy is.
everything.
I
So
agree with you.
there are
Economy
a
is
lot of
number
folks here
two.
that are
Okay,
frustrated by both
Mark.
the Ukrainian war,
We're-
COVID, and a number of other things. So they're trying to figure
we're
out how
on
to
the
survive.
same page. The economy is number two. What you're just describing: people having food in their refrigerator, people living well, making sure that they have jobs and good education,
Yeah,
good
but
jobs
Mark,
in the
the-
economy. That's
the
number two.
inflation-
But it's
inflation
not
is-
the Grammys. You know what CBS
Exactly,
had as their lead show? The Grammys. Who gives a rat's rear?
Nick,
Those are a bunch of rich
Nick,
people that are
This inflation is deliberate.
Rid of
Mark.
follow
But that's
the
the
money.
nature of entertainment, and
Follow
like
the money.
every other
Grammys
man,
is
you're gonna tell
there.
me that you don't
Slow
want
it
to
up.
pay attention to the
More
Super Bowl every week.
songs, more
Putin over
CDs.
the Grammys.
That's nothing but about money. On Ukrainian war, the money can make only Raytheon Technologies and General Dynamics. On Grammys, all these Sony pictures and all other entertainment conglomerates, this is for them time to make money selling CDs, records, and everything else. So this is why Grammy is so important. So, by folks, okay, you'll die anyway, but before you die, please
Bunch
buy
of fanny-ass
this.
actors,
CDs.
right?
But the Grammys
They're
aren't
not
that
really
important,
loyal
and
to
I'm
the
sorry
United States
Steve's not
anyway.
here,
We
but
don't
Tom
care.
Brady's not that important either. Steve led with Tom Brady. I was looking for, hey, Steve, you're going to show about the economy and interest rates going up a quarter point, which could send a bunch of people into bankruptcy. Steve, you're going to talk about the
Devastating,
war in
actually.
Iraq and in Ukraine, which could blow my rear up. No, Steve led with Tom Brady. No one in the world, no one outside the United States gives a rat's rear about Tom Brady. The
Yeah,
rest
but
of
hold
the
on.
world that we
Wait a
broadcast
sec. Wait a
don't
sec.
like U.S. football.
Wait a minute, you say nobody
Hold
gives
on.
a rat's
Hold
ass,
on.
but the people give
I
a
want to
rat's
tell
ass
you
about the
something.
monarchy,
About
and they
economy.
just announced in
Nothing
Australia that they're not going to
happened
change the
yesterday. Mark,
coin or the money
US
in
football is
Australia
hated
because they're
around
going to
the
keep it
world.
as
They don't
I
even
think
like
they said they were going to keep
not even the
uh,
number one sport. Not even
Queen
close.
Elizabeth on, and they're not going to put King Charles on, and that was a major story in Australia and everything. But you're saying that that's not of concern
No,
even
King
there in
Charles is not that
Australia and
interesting.
everything, because that was a major story that I saw that
No,
they
it's
were
not a
going to
major
make this
story.
whole notion
No, it's-
about
it's-
whether
King
they needed to
Charles
change
is
the
not a
money
major
there in
story. I'm
Australia
sorry.
to honor the Commonwealth leader in over there in England. So I'm going like, why do they
A
care about that?
monarchy from the 1500s and the turn of the
He's
year
not
1000
really a leader.
is not a major story. We don't give a rat's rear about King Charles.
Mark,
But I
this
mean, do we
point,
care
a
that?
war's
Because
going
I mean,
on.
that's a major news story all over NBC. Is the fact that the royal family is about to be ditched
We
from
don't
the
care
Australian
about the royal
$5
family.
note.
They're
Okay, listen,
figureheads.
newsflash: the royal family is not important in the world.
They
Okay,
have no
it's
power.
only
You
important
say
because
the royal family is not
people
important, but
like
you know how many
those.
people watch The Crown and are
Not
still watching The
important.
Crown? Because a lot of people are very much into the royal notion and all of that. They want to be, maybe they want to be royals, maybe they are enamored
No,
by the
it's not
royals and
important.
things of that
Okay.
nature, whether that's the
Wish was
current
there
royals,
in their
they're
world.
in
I
England, or
wish
whether
them
that's
in
our
the
own
Okay.
version, the
What's
Kennedys and the
interesting
Trumps.
about new Prime Minister of England that his financial worth exceeds Charles III. It's the first time ever that
I
Prime
didn't know
Minister is richer than the King of England.
Yeah.
So this is complete demise of monarchy of England when somebody like
Yeah, but that's because the monarchy is not that important. Okay, I mean the thing is, we should not be reporting on the monarchy. Okay, that's left over from what was it, Revolutionary War? Forget it.
Hey, so
You know, we have some
the
important
other thing that
issues to
Steve
discuss.
referenced, and it was a
Like
funeral
making sure
yesterday,
people have
is
food on their
should we be
table.
caring about police forces around the world? We definitely mentioned the Wagner Group, which is definitely a militant and a terrorist group. I definitely agree with that.
It's a group of
But you know,
mercenaries.
a lot of people are concerned about police, but not just police here, but police in Nigeria. Tyree Nichols and what happened there, and apparently in Pakistan, it was a mosque bomber that was disguised as a policeman. So she or he walked in as a policeman. So do we need to be concerned about the nature of police, which are also
No.
all
Sure.
over the world?
And you know what?
Not
I
as
would-
much. Okay, wait. Time out. The odds of you getting killed by a policeman is a lot less than being killed by your neighbor. I'm sorry. Okay, and this is upside down reporting again. They're all
That's
focusing, oh, the policemen, they're so bad. In the meantime, Memphis had 300 murders that were committed by people, not policemen, people. And none of it was reported. No outrage. That's okay. One person got killed by the police, and it's a big outrage. Okay. We're totally upside down in this area. What they should have focused in on, what about the 300 people that just got killed by random people and
Nick,
different types of events?
Nick,
Let's
it's not who gets killed.
for that.
With the media, Nick, I'm sorry. It's not who gets killed. It's who does the killing. That's what's important.
Yes, it is. But those 300 people, I'm sure, got killed for various different reasons. And you know what reporting you got on that, Lee? Zero. Their lives don't.
Because there was nothing for them to be gained by reporting on it.
But can you say that on a national level? Can you say that on a local level? Because even in Youngsville and everything, we have somebody that is connected to one of those murders and all of that. But we do know that story has been reported. It's been reported about somebody that was killed there in a small rural town. Unfortunately, it's somebody that is connected to it's somebody whose family is connected to our own family here and all of that space. But I have seen that story covered and everything. So that you can't say that those stories are not covered, because it was a bleed story. The man was killed, and unfortunately it was related to one of our leaders' family members, and she's made that plain in a couple of emails. So I'm not speaking out of school, because she even told me to bring it up and everything. So I'm bringing it up. So that we can't say that that's not being covered, because that's being covered even locally.
Barely. Okay. In other words, like I said, Mark, barely. Remember, Mr. Journalist, there are 300 murders in Memphis, which averages almost one per day. So
I guess what I'm saying is that every news story in Durham, every news story in Raleigh, every news story in New York leads with at least a murder or two, because as we have oftentimes pointed in the media, it is oftentimes what bleeds that leads. And so I can't not say that folks that are murdered are not being covered. Now, whether they're being covered as much as some of the other murders, that I would agree with. But I can't say that folks that are being murdered including in Memphis, I guarantee you that some of those 300 you're talking about, at least in the newspapers and probably even in the TV stations, if depending on the nature of the murder, if it was kind of like a gruesome attack, or if it was a cold-blooded attack, I guarantee you that was covered in Memphis.
Well, yeah, maybe a little byline in one of their little newspapers, and they go, that's covered. But that's not what national media is all about. I'm talking about like the major networks will not cover that murder. They'll totally ignore it. In other words, that person's life, whether they were killed by a gang member or like here, believe it or not, the two murders that took place in my neighborhood were spousal murders, okay? Which, by the way, is quite common. And what was with the wife blew the person, her husband, away right down the street from where I live. And another one at the Barnes and Noble, right down the street from where I live. You know how much reporting it got in the national media? You know how much outrage it got from men? Did the men go, me too? I got blown away also? It got zero reporting. Zero.
You know what the leading cause of death in the United States and around the world is?
What?
Birth?
Abortion.
Abortion. Yeah, I mean, well, I wouldn't be surprised on that. Okay, that's a whole nother argument, obviously.
That's a whole other argument, and apparently Minnesota has jumped into it, because Minnesota has said that they are going to codify abortion in that particular city and everything.
Dan, you just brought that up. The CDC is considering declaring abortion now a public health emergency because of women lack of access to abortion facilities.
No, it should
It
be
was in the news yesterday.
And Nikki Haley, our lovely favorite politician, has said that women don't care about contraception. That's part of her political agenda.
I don't get it either. He gets no say until he's 18, I guess.
Okay, you can put down this, and this is what gets me about the Democratic Party. They're so inconsistent. Sorry for the members. Okay, Black lives matter, but unborn children's lives, they don't matter. Okay,
no, because they're not people.
So how can you be
not people to them?
In your story? I mean,
first off, that's not altogether true, because there are some members of Black Lives Matter that are also members of the anti-abortion crowd as well. So you can't say that, because there are folks that are members of.
Mark, send me the link.
I mean, that's like saying that you can't be on one side of an issue and have to be on the other. Because I know some folks that are adamantly anti-death penalty, but they are also maybe pro-abortion, and some people would say that that is a contradiction, but in their mind it is not a contradiction, because they have different views about where life begins, how life begins, who needs to be punished, and things of that nature.
Positions are inconsistent. In other words, you can have inconsistent positions. You just have to admit my position. The Democratic Party has to admit my positions are inconsistent when it comes to lives that matter. Okay.
Well, I think that
Well,
all
Black
the
Lives
parties'
The
Matter.
positions are
Democratic Party
inconsistent.
only cares about getting
So
elected.
let's just be inconsistent.
That's all they care about. They only want to get elected. So they'll take a
That's right. So they
position
take the
where
easier
they
way
get the
out.
most support.
And Dan, you're telling me the Republicans don't want to get elected and they won't just say things just to get their base riled up as well.
No,
So
they,
you can't
they,
say
they
that
do the
that's
same
not the
thing.
case
That's
on
the
both
reason the
sides.
parties are both bad.
There's plenty of slop to go around, Mark.
The lives
Yes,
of
it's
children, it's shameful. It's shameful.
Yeah,
God will
yeah,
judge us
and they're
for
inconsistent.
destroying newborn lives. It's a
Well, like I
sin.
said, I've
You
not made
know
it up
it
to the
is.
pearly gates. So I'm not going to make that judgment yet. And I think some people, when they get up there, they might be surprised at who they find and also one of the different views that go on. But like I said, I haven't made it up to the pearly gates yet. So I'm not going
Without
to say
without a medical
what's going to
reason,
happen
without
until it
a-
happens. I
without
remember one person that told me that there were
mother or
totally separate
something,
villages up there
murdering a
as well.
child, an
And since
unborn
I haven't been
child,
there, I
sin.
can't argue that they were right
I
or
mean, you know,
wrong.
I
But
mean, it's
somebody
just-
told me
I
they
don't make the
had
rules.
a beyond life experience and
You
they
know what
saw
happened,
like different
Mark?
societies up there.
The rules existed. God created them in the beginning, right? It's sort of been that way. We've modified them on our own. It isn't, you know, we have in our country the idea of inalienable rights. It's not rights that the government gives us. It's a rights that our God gave us. Inalienable.
But Dan, some of the things that are put out there, even in some of our most holiest books, whether you are a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, there are definitely things that have not changed in the sands of time, and they will never change in the sands of time. But there are things that were written about that have to be interpreted because they weren't around at that particular time, and there are people that are trying to interpret how that is done. Like this whole technology stuff that wasn't around in the age of the Bible.
Thou shalt not kill.
I said those are certain ones that
Thou
are very
shalt
basic.
not
I heard that one. I
kill.
said there are basic rules
Yeah,
that are
thou
very
shalt
basic,
not
but I'm
kill
just saying
is
there are
kind of an
also
easy
things
one.
that have happened
I
in
mean,
society.
you-
Because
you-
even
Thou
in
shalt not
even
kill
in
is
that
the
one,
that you
even
want to
in that
terminate
one, there are
the
things that
unborn
could be
child.
technically considered
There's
killing
not
that
thou
are
shalt not
technological
kill,
things
and
that are
there's
going on.
exception to it.
But
It's not thou
is it
shalt
really
kill
killing or is it
unless,
really not?
I
right?
think that was a
Not
pretty clear
unless.
statement. I don't have
It's
a
not
real
a
problem with that.
guideline, right? It's
You
a
know,
commandment.
But,
There were
but,
10
but,
of them.
but this gets me with the Democratic Party, and I told the Democrats too. Even though I'm a member, I say I can't support all your positions because they're inconsistent. You can't say Black Lives Matter and unborn children's lives don't matter in the same breath. Either you're pro-life or you're not. Okay.
Or the blue lives don't matter, right?
Pardon?
Or the blue lives.
Blue
don't
lights, please.
Blue lives don't matter, right? Blue
Yeah,
lives
that's
do
what they
matter,
seem
right?
not to care.
You know, all of a sudden
anything
they don't
but
matter also
themselves.
as well. So either
You know,
you're
Black
pro-
I mean,
Lives
but one of the
Matter
things that's happened
is a
is that
racist
there are people
organization.
that they are feeling are
All they
on.
care about are blacks.
No,
They
but
don't
there are
care
people
about
that are
Some
torn
blacks.
between
Dan, some blacks.
both
Only some.
fractions, because that's part of what's happened in Memphis. Because all 5 of those officers were African American officers, and some people
Yeah.
are asking whether
Just
they were
imagine that.
rushed to judgment
and the
quicker than
sad-
other
sad
people
part
were,
is
and there are
they
some people that are saying that
were
they
actually paid
took
to
more
do
of
that
the
job.
blue lives
They were-
stance
they
than
were
they
paid
did
to
the black
install-
lives
Okay.
stance.
And
I
So
would like
there's
to
a
ask
whole
very
conversation around
hypothetical
that
question.
as
More
well.
likely to be
And
murdered
I would
by
like to
a
know
black
answer
person or a
from
white
you and
person.
Mark.
And in this corner, we got Sasha.
Very hypothetical question. Let's see, supposedly, a black woman has an abortion and the fetus is white. So in this case, what rules first? Black lives matter, but the fetus is white, so his life doesn't matter really, right? So
That's black and white crime.
then how you can get out of this?
It's the black woman's life that trumps everything, because they say that they don't recognize the baby as a person.
Well, it depends on which
That's how they
way you
rationalize
like
it.
I said, there are some folks in the Black
But I
Lives
said the
Matter
fetus
That's
is
movement that are
white.
actually pro-life.
No, I understand that.
That's like making a uniform statement about an organization, and I'm not going to make a uniform statement about organizations in that line and everything, because I do know that there are members of Black Lives Matter, just like I know that there are
Mark.
members of the Proud Boys that are
Mark, I
having
got a question
different views
for you.
than say
I've
what
got a
their
question for
leadership is.
And
Mark,
hey,
I got
Mark,
a
would you say the same thing about the KKK?
No,
You're not going to
no,
make a
Mark,
judgment
I'm
about the
gonna-
organization?
I'm going to ask an insensitive question. May I?
I just
You're
did.
pretty insensitive to begin with.
I beat you to
Okay,
it, Dan.
Statistically,
I think Lee.
who's
brought
more
it to it.
likely to murder you, a black man or a white man?
Well, I mean, black on black crime is the bigger issue, and there
Can I
are
ask the
people that
question?
speak on that issue as well.
Yeah,
That is a
Mark,
common conversation,
Mark,
and
can I
that's
ask the
something I
question?
brought up here. That I said that there are a number of
black
folks
man
that
or a
talk
black
about that
woman?
even in the Black Lives Matter
Mark,
conversation. So even in Black Lives
Everyone
Matter, they
wants
talked
to
about that,
be
and
a
they brought
black
that
man or a
up as
black
well.
woman.
So that, but the
Could be
other thing is the
black,
judicial system is
That's not
totally
a
corrupt and
racist
totally fucked
comment.
up because,
That's
excuse my
just
language,
fact.
I just used that language. I wasn't supposed to use that.
Mark,
But it's
Mark,
totally messed
you,
up because of the
Dan
nature
asked the
of
question.
the police force, the judicial force, and the way that it was created. Let's be very clear. Part of the judicial system and the legal system, hate to tell you
We're
this,
not
Nick,
talking-
came out of slavery,
Mark,
came straight out of slavery and all of that, and it's not a state
Dan, I don't think
slavery.
Mark heard your
Because that is
question.
definitely tied into the
All
whole
right.
creation
And so,
of the prison
Mark,
system
here's
and the
the
overseers
problem.
and all of that are tied in together. So until we reform the prison system, we got a major issue
So
in
what
general.
does that have to
There's a
do
lot
with
of folks
my
that get away with
question,
crimes
Mark?
that are of a white shade.
What does that have to do with my question and the issue
I
about
answered your question. I just
nationality?
said that if you're going about statistics, the cases with black on black crime is a bigger issue, and I've said that there are people
Yeah,
even
that's
in Black
true.
Lives Matter that have spoke on that issue as well, including the Black Panthers. So, like I said, that has been discussed in the community and continues to be discussed in the community. I brought up here several times, including when it happened, that there were several of the African American leaders that actually brought that up at the depths of Haiti, where Steve
Yeah,
Sarkey
but if
had earlier,
anybody
and that
in
was
the
a
white
major story.
community
By the way,
brings
that
it
was
up,
covered.
we're
By the way,
racist,
that
right?
was covered, Nick, by
That's
the
really
news media.
the
I don't know
issue.
about the national news media, but at least the state and the local news
And
media
then
did
if
cover when
anybody
that took
talks
place.
about crime statistics, then we're being racist. You
Uh-huh.
know, the problem is there's a double standard. We can't be factual about anything and be truthful about anything or be real about anything, because if we do, we're going to be labeled as racist or misogynistic or whatever labels.
Well, I mean, if you make a statement and you make a statement
Right now,
that people consider
we're running out of
insensitive,
time,
then people will
so
consider that racist and everything. That was actually part of what
we
me
can
and
continue that
Steve were
tomorrow.
talking
So
about at the meeting yesterday when he actually stumbled across me because he
somehow,
actually
Yeah,
took some
Dan,
serious
Dan, one
offense to
sec.
what you
Mark,
said
We're
and
not
everything
back
because he thought it was an
to
insult.
Hey,
Rachel.
Mark,
I'm not sure.
there's a popular quote from Jesse Jackson. Can you read it? I put it in the chat. This is from Jesse Jackson.
What do you say?
Let's see
There's
what that
nothing
is.
more painful to me at this stage in my life than walking down the street and hearing footsteps, then turning around and see someone white and feel relieved. Jesse Jackson said that.
Well, he said it probably years ago. You know.
Yeah, he did.
But anyway,
He did. He did, Nick.
We're at the hour.
That is so funny.
We will.
Mark,
Hopefully, everybody will
maybe
stay safe.
you can tell me, please.
Dan, I thought you would enjoy that.
A lot
We're
of
past the
artists
hour. We gotta
in
go.
the United States, like for example, Italians, the Latin Americans, Jews, and others. Why don't we have an Italian Day, Italian Lives Matter, Jewish Lives Matter, and some other White Blacks Lives Matter? What
All their lives matter,
Blacks
and
against
we're out
other
of time.
Well,